We are live. Got it. All right. I found mine. If you found yours.
Yeah, mine just popped up too. My iPad's been kind of slow. I think I don't know what version of iPad it is, but I've got one that's, I think, kind of getting ready to be done.
Yeah, I have an older one too, and I pay a lot of bills on there, and every time now I go to pay a bill on one of the things, all the apps say like, "Sorry, our apps don't support your old iPad anymore. You need to go online and do it." So I need to get a new one.
They'd be like, all right, give me a cut on my bill and I'll buy
Yeah,
a new iPad so I can keep on paying my bill. That'd be
yeah,
nice.
exactly.
I think we're ready to roll here.
Yep. Hey everybody, good to see you.
So we're going to be picking up in Matthew 22, and we covered a lot last time in chapter 21 as Jesus is in Jerusalem and really confronting the Pharisees, the scribes. He's going to get into it with the Sadducees eventually in chapter 22. I guess to me, and I don't know, you may want to expand on this as we get into chapter 22 and just kind of continue this dialogue. But for me, the overarching thing is Jesus is confronting their failure and sort of contrasting his and those who are with him being the ones who are going to possess the kingdom. I mean, he obviously, in the truest sense, but all those who are with him will possess the kingdom. And those who think that they're possessing the kingdom now, the people who think they're running God's show, they're going to be judged and proven to be faulty in their duty toward God. And that's a pretty hard pill for them to swallow, obviously, and that's eventually going to be the reason why they have Jesus crucified. But that to me is kind of the big picture setting. But what else do you think we need to draw out from the end of chapter 21 to set up what we're going to do today?
Well, anytime in the ancient world somebody was going to challenge the throne or challenge the king or challenge the leaders, there's always going to be a fight, right? So you have Jesus showing up in Jerusalem here, being hailed as the king. Of course, he's going to come into town, and there's going to be some mixing it up with the leaders that be. You know what I mean? So I think that's what we're going to see here in chapter 22. These guys begin to come at him, challenge him, test him, and he's going to fire right back by the end of this chapter and then expose everything about them in chapter 23, all their hypocrisy. But it was for judgment that Jesus came into the world, and part of what we need to recognize is he wasn't just going to Jerusalem to die for the sins of mankind. He was going to Jerusalem to expose the faulty leadership, to bring judgment on the people of God who had been failing to do what God had put them in the vineyard to do, like the last parable. He was trying to accomplish a lot here as the new coming king.
Yep. Yep. All right, good. So I think I'm just going to read the last two verses of chapter 21, and then we'll read down through Matthew 22 and verse 22 to get into what we're going to talk about today.
Great.
Matthew 21, verse 45 says, when the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they understood that he was speaking about them. And although they sought to arrest him, they feared the crowds, since they considered him to be a prophet. Jesus spoke to them again in parables, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who held a wedding feast for his son. And he sent his slaves to call those who had been invited to the wedding feast, and they were unwilling to come. Again, he sent other slaves, saying, tell those who have been invited, behold, I've prepared my dinner. My oxen, my fattened cattle are all butchered, and everything's ready. Come to the wedding feast. But they paid no attention, and they went their separate ways. One to his own farm, another to his business, and the rest seized his slaves and treated them abusively and then killed them. Now the king was angry, and he sent his armies and destroyed those murderers and set their city on fire. And then he said to his slaves, the wedding feast is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy. So go to the main roads and invite whomever you find there to the wedding feast. Those slaves went out into the streets and gathered together all whom they found, both bad and good, and the wedding hall was filled with dinner guests. When the king came in to look over the dinner guests, He saw a man there who was not dressed in wedding clothes, and he said to him, "Friend, how did you get in here without wedding clothes?" And the man was speechless. Then the king said to the servants, "Tie his hands and feet and throw him into the outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth in that place. For many are called, but few are chosen." Then the Pharisees went and plotted together how they might trap him in what he said. And they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are truthful and teach the way of God in truth, and do not care what anyone thinks, for you're not partial to anyone. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it permissible to pay a poll tax to Caesar or not?" But Jesus perceived their malice, and he said, "Why are you testing me, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the poll tax." And they brought him a denarius. And he said to them, "Whose image and inscription is this?" They said to him, "Caesar's." Then he said to them, "Then pay to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And hearing this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away.
Very good. I kind of don't like that we're only doing half this chapter,
I
because
know.
part of understanding this chapter, I think, is to see that, they're going to keep sending people to Jesus to test him. There's going to be all these different things going on. And then by the end of chapter 22, Jesus is going to turn it around on them, ask them some questions they can't answer,
Yeah.
or don't want to answer, and essentially get them to finally stop talking. But this is just the first of that.
Yeah.
Um, but here we go. Right after, like you pointed out at the end of chapter 21, the Pharisees are beginning to understand that these parables are about them. And this is making them upset. This is angering them. But they can't really do anything about it because people are loving what Jesus is doing and saying.
Yeah.
I mean, right now, the crowds are on his side. Um, it really is a fascinating thing to think about what this would have been like. Could you imagine getting to watch this unfold um, and hear Jesus really calling out these leaders? Man, I can't even imagine what this would have been like.
Yeah. I was trying to find it real quick. Do you remember, have you seen that GIF that's like this kid and all his friends are like, "Oh," and he's just like this right here?
Yeah.
That's kind of what I imagine every time I read these.
Yeah. Those Jerusalem kids. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Um, maybe somebody will find that later and attach it or something. All right. First things first, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding feast. The kingdom of heaven is not a funeral, and it isn't something that we should be stoic about and down about. Is there persecution that comes along with being in the kingdom? Sure. Are there hardships? Are there sufferings? Yes. The New Testament's going to bear out that there's a lot of difficulty that comes along with identifying Jesus as your king, living under his economy, being his people. But when Jesus would describe the kingdom, it's a wedding feast. It's good news. It's something to be joyful about. No matter how many difficulties come, we need to maintain that proper spirit about what we have with Jesus Christ. This goes all the way back to the beginning of his sermons in Matthew. Blessed are, blessed are, blessed are, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Um, Not to say that there's not times for us to be down or sad or appropriately, like disturbed by things. But overall, we should live lives of victory and joy and fellowship with God. And I love that the parables usually are about things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And uh, the reason why it's something of I think the challenging part, and you were kind of even alluding to this, people are like, well, but there is this hard stuff that goes along with it. So how am I supposed to put that together? I should be excited, but also be sober or take duty. Well, the marriage feast is actually a great illustration of that. To be married is a beautiful thing. Here you go. You got somebody that loves you, that you're going to love, that you're going to work together, you're going to bring good into the world and all this kind of stuff. That's great stuff. Uh, because of this union you have with somebody that's really special and unique. And that's ultimately what God's doing with us, is he's bringing us into union with him. And the problem in this parable is there's people who are not celebrating that union. They're not interested in that relationship.
Right.
They don't see it as a blessing. They don't see it as a source of joy. It's almost irrelevant to the people who get invited to the wedding feast. They don't care about this relationship that, as I think the parable is pointing toward, that God's creating with humanity through his son Jesus. And that's the real tragedy, is that not only they rejected it, but they thought it was kind of foolish and not something they wanted to be a part of.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So analyzing this parable, if the kingdom of heaven is like this wedding feast, what's Jesus focusing on here? And what he's focusing on are the invitations being given to the wedding. You've got like different waves of inviting and all that going on. I think we have to read this in the context of the Jewish people, his own people, were invited first.
Yeah.
They're largely going to reject his offer. By the time this parable's done, I think what we really have is an allusion to the fact that Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. He's going to burn the city with fire. And he's going to invite everybody out in the bushes, basically, to come in, the Gentiles. Um, Jesus was kind of giving a foreshadowing of, hey, here's what you guys are going to see unfold here because you're rejecting the invitation that God's given you to this.
And I think there's a parallel, like the parable we looked at last time with the two sons. And Jesus says the son who at first rejected but then obeyed is like the prostitutes and the tax collectors, the people that were not the chief priests and Pharisees and scribes and all that. Besides it being Gentile, I think you're right. Like this would include the Gentiles. I think it would also include anybody that people would have thought of as being outside the covenant kingdom. Everybody who were the really sinful people, the prostitutes and the tax collectors, the people that were with Jesus. Jesus said those people, they at least heard the message. They accepted the call. They took the call and they came.
Yeah.
And at least those who would remain would be those who, quote unquote, wore the right clothes to the occasion. They got dressed in righteousness and purity and devotion and all those things. Are you willing to be a part, accept this invitation, humble yourself, make this your priority, and answer the call? Which is so reminiscent of what Jesus was doing all throughout his ministry. Earlier on in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus would see people, he would call them, come follow me, take up your cross, all that kind of stuff. This is kind of a story that pictures all that stuff and the real difference between the leaders in Jerusalem and the people who would end up with Jesus, whether or not they answered the call or not.
Yeah. Good. So looking a little closer at the way these people react, in verse 3, it says the first people invited, they were just unwilling to come.
Mm-hmm.
But notice that the king is not unwilling to stop inviting. Like the king doesn't say, oh, well, I guess nobody wants to come to this. Well, then forget everybody else. No, he keeps trying. He keeps trying. He keeps trying. Like, how long through human history has God continued to reach out to us? Like, how patient has he been with people ignoring him and being unwilling to come close to him? And yet, all of us who aren't Jewish, all of us Gentiles, we're the beneficiaries of God being patient and continually inviting and having everything prepared and ready for us to come in. I do think, though, it's interesting to notice verse 3 says some were unwilling. And then the second group that goes out in verse 4, he says, hey, I've prepared everything, oxen, fat, and livestock. Everything's butchered. Everything's ready. This helps us understand that when Jesus came into the world and he goes to Jerusalem, it was time. God was ready to give it all to humanity. But then in verse 5, it says, these people paid no attention and went their way. Notice that they didn't go, to the prostitutes and the bars. They went to their farms and their businesses. These guys weren't out going doing a bunch of terrible, bad things. They were just living their life for themselves. I've got farms, I've got business, I've got my life. How many people haven't come to God because they think, well, I'll get to God eventually when I get my life together and my business in order, and I'm just not really paying attention to spiritual things. This is a really important warning.
And that goes back to the parable of the sower, where the people who get choked out are those who are caught up, again, like you said, not in a bunch of overtly wicked stuff, or at least not in our eyes, wicked stuff, just the cares of this world, just riches and all that kind of deal. That's
Yeah.
the thing. The really frightening thing to me is I think we can see that stuff maybe in ourselves. We're like, yeah, it's not great. I'm kind of a little too into my job, or I'm a little too, whatever. I'm not as serious about the Lord as I need to be. Where that leads in verse 6, they seized the slaves, treated them abusively, and then killed them.
Yep.
So these things that may seem like not that big of a deal to us, that we're distracted by worldly things, I don't even know if it directly leads to it. It just is. It's a violent act against God and against his purposes in the world and in our own lives and in the lives of those around us. Whenever we stay caught up in the things of this world, it's a violent act against the goodness of God. And
Yeah.
that's a pretty hard pill to swallow.
Yeah. And then something else in this parable that helps us understand what's going on with God in verse 7, the king's enraged and he's going to send out armies to destroy. We're foolish to think as human beings that by us either just ignoring God or, I mean, heaven forbid that we become people who actually purposefully attack God's people. There are people like that, and that's what you have here. You have some who seize them and beat them up. Others just sort of shrugged their shoulders and said, "We don't really care what God's doing in the world." God is a God who can get angry with his creation and will destroy nations, places, people who destroy his earth. There's a phrase in the book of Revelation that, the book of Revelation is all about Jesus taking his throne and then dealing with the world as king,
Mhm.
but he destroys those who destroy his earth. He goes after those that don't appreciate what God's doing in the world. Um, and again, these are, I've often wondered too, did the apostles see themselves in this story? Do we Christians see ourselves in this story? I think the slaves who are doing the inviting moves from the prophets in the Old Testament to the apostles who are preaching the kingdom. I think they're going to live out this thing about when the king calls them back in and says, "Hey, uh, where is it there? Verse 8, he said to the slaves, the wedding's ready and those who are invited are not worthy. Go therefore to the main highways." That's like the book of Acts. These apostles are trying to preach to the Jews. They're not having it. And the Holy Spirit's going to tell them in Acts, okay, turn to the Gentiles. Man, that was a tough shift for them as people who cared about their own people. But then we need to see ourselves as part of this slave crew too, continually inviting people, hey, you need to be a part of this, and realize there's going to be mixed reactions to that. Most of which, like what, many are called, but few are chosen. Most invitations to people aren't going to come to fruition the way you hope. We need to be okay with that in evangelism.
Yeah. So what do you think is the bit? So, I mean, the slaves go out, they invite people on the highways and byways, and people come, and the house is full. It's great. I mean, this is kind of a portrait, I think, of at least that piece is can be seen in the response to the gospel. You mentioned the book of Acts. In the book of Acts, people that are excited come to Jesus, they've been saved, they're being restored, they're following after the Messiah, all that great stuff. So what do you make of the bit with the guy who's wearing the wrong clothes, and the mass, the king is, hey, how'd you even get it? What are you doing here like this? And then cast the guy out. That guy almost seems, I mean, he gets featured as kind of getting the worst judgment. It's not even just because those other guys, they got killed, which is bad enough, but here, tie his hands and his feet, throw him into the outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth in that place. For many are called, but few are chosen. Like, Jesus really is making a big deal out of this last guy that wasn't appropriately dressed. So what's your take on that?
Well, if we don't have verse 11 where the king comes in to look at the guests, then we might seem to think, okay, well, all that's really needed then is just a response.
Show
Like,
up.
okay, I'll come to church. I'll be a part of the church. Somebody earlier, I think Melanie said, like, some people think it's just about church attendance.
Mhm.
Hey, I answered the invitation. I became a Christian. I got baptized. I come to church. I do my thing. I'm better than all those other people out there that rejected it. I didn't mistreat, the preachers. I didn't ignore them. Here I am, like I'm in, you know. Um, but Jesus still says the kingdom of heaven being a feast, this king wants people in the wedding and in the ceremony and part of this thing that know what it means and want to be here and are are excited to be a part of this invitation. Um, they didn't just wander in to kind of look around and be like, oh, hey, what's the spread? What benefits can I get? I'm crashing the wedding. Um, no, there's going to be a serious look at that. And so I don't know. I mean, maybe this is Jesus saying, don't get overly excited if you're one of the people that has responded to the invitation, if you're not all in here. Don't be lukewarm with this. Don't come in here and think you can grow up and not bear fruit like earlier parables. You look like the plant, but you're not really bearing fruit. No, the kingdom of heaven is for people that really want to have a relationship with the king.
Yeah. Which Jesus has done stuff like that. I mean, Matthew 8, hey, Lord, I'll follow you wherever you go. And Jesus basically looks at him and says, are you sure about that? 'Cause I don't even know where I'm going to be tonight. You need to think about it. Or in Matthew 16, he talks about, I'm going to build my church. The gates of Hades will not prevail. This is great. If you want to be my disciple, you got to take up your cross. You got to deny yourself. You got to follow me. You got to lose your life. So yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think this parable and this part of the parable makes a lot of sense of a lot of the teachings throughout the New Testament letters written to churches, which are all either, hey, don't forget this is the way you need to keep living, or y'all need to straighten up, or y'all need to punish this person. I mean, punish
Right.
maybe too strong a word, but you need to take action to wake each other up whenever you're not living righteously, because just because you accepted Jesus Christ, just because you confessed faith, you were baptized, you've been saved, that's not the end of the story. We've got to live out the wedding feast appropriately. Even the book of Revelation, the people who are going to be in the wedding feast are those who are wearing the linen white and clean, and the white linen is the righteous deeds of the saints, Revelation 19:10. So we got to keep on going with it.
Yeah, great point. This thing about him being thrown out there, bind him hand and foot, throw him out into outer darkness. And when the king comes in and sees him not prepared, you know, I can't help but think just in the previous chapters when Jesus came into Jerusalem, he basically goes into the temple that should have had all the most privileged people on planet Earth living there. Priests, Pharisees, scribes, the people that handle God's law, they're close to God, they serve God on men's behalf and serve men on God's behalf. Like, what a wonderful place and situation to be in. But what did he do when he got into the temple? He whipped him and threw him out of the temple. He's like, you don't belong here. You guys don't belong here. It's not going to be any different under the new covenant in the kingdom, the new Jerusalem that Jesus brought. People wandering around acting like, hey, we belong here. This is our place. We get to do as we wish here, and not recognizing the authority of the king.
Yeah.
Why would it be any different, that people get thrown out for that kind of thing? So, yeah, a lot of interesting stuff going on here. We probably should move on to the next section we read, or else we're gonna run out of time.
I was about to say, yeah. So I love this one
Yeah, 15
because you
through
can
20.
tell they knew they had Jesus right where they wanted him.
Yep.
If he says yes, you should pay the taxes. Then all the Jews are like, look, this guy, you think, is this your king? This is the Messiah? He's supporting the pagans. He's supporting the enemies. This guy cannot be the Messiah because the Messiah is going to overthrow the oppressors and the evildoers and all that. He can't be. But on the other hand, if Jesus says, no, we shouldn't pay the tax to Caesar, then they just run to the Romans and say, ha, this guy right here, you need to arrest him. He is leading, they called him the king. They called him the king just the other day. And he's fomenting a rebellion, trying to get people to stop paying taxes. So they got him either way. I mean, this was actually a really great, from a human perspective, I think a pretty great question if they were trying to trip Jesus up. They didn't
Yeah.
know who they were messing with, but they thought they had him.
Yeah. Verse 18 says, Jesus perceived, my version says, Jesus perceived their malice.
Yeah, that's what it says too.
Like, I love that. You ever had somebody ask you questions or talk to you about something and you could just see it. You just knew that there was something disingenuous about what was going on. Jesus was so good at that. But I love this. Number one, we didn't mention this, but in verse 16, their testimony about Jesus, you defer to no one, you're not partial to anybody, you speak the truth of God. I love that they know this about Jesus by now,
Yeah.
you know. Um, but they're almost using it sort of to bait him in, like, ooh, compliment, compliment, but then trying to trip him up. I would say Christians need to be savvy about this. I've seen this happen. Somebody comes to a Christian or Bible teacher or somebody who knows something about scripture and be like, hey, you really know that Bible, don't you? Like you only say what it says, and I like that about you. So what about this? And maybe the person doesn't realize they're being set up in
Yeah.
this moment for people to come down hard on them because they say something, you know, that is going to come off all wrong. My favorite part of this, he says to them in verse 19. Well, number one, he calls them out. He's like, why are you testing me, you hypocrites?
Like, I know what we're doing. I know what we're
Yeah.
doing. You're not looking for the truth. So just so you know, I know.
But how great is this when he says, show me the coin?
Yeah.
He doesn't even have his own.
That's a great one. I never thought of
Like, he doesn't reach into his own pocket and take out Roman money. He
that.
goes, what money are you guys talking about? And they're like, oh, here, this money. It's like, you guys are using the money. Like, you are using the money of the Romans. And you're trying to test me like I'm gonna say something wrong about this. He's like, yeah, so you got the money, and who's on that? And they're like, oh, this is Caesar. Again, if you guys are so anti-Rome, why are you carrying his money around?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, like everything about this is fun to me.
Yeah.
Um,
Because it's an exposure. And this is I mean, and we're going to see this more when we get to the rest of chapter 22. He's exposing what's going on inside of them, not just, haha, I'm going to win the debate point. Like the
yeah,
first thing he says shows that. Why are you testing me, you hypocrites? That's the problem here. And then same, you guys are just as in bed with Caesar as anybody you might ever claim could be.
yeah,
I love his answer. It's so simple and so, I mean, obviously it's so simple, but the simple things are the most profound. They walk away amazed because Jesus says, well, Caesar made it. It's got his face on it. It bears his likeness and his image. If he asks for it, give it back to him. Give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. Duh. Which is great. But then it's the next level stuff that I think is even better. Um, and to me, there's two things that he brings out at least. One, he's challenging them and saying, you know, you guys should give the things that bear Caesar's image, you should give them to Caesar. The things that bear God's image, those should be given to God. And that's you, buddy. So how you doing with that? Are you really giving yourself as an image bearer of God?
yeah,
But I also like that Jesus here is kind of, I don't even know if it's all that subtle on, and I don't know the exact coin that he used, but the coins often said Caesar so and so, a son of the gods, or the God, or the divine. Jesus makes a contrast between Caesar and God. And he says, hey, Caesar is Caesar, but he's not God. And there's somebody of a much higher authority than any human authority could ever exist. And you need to I'm taking him most seriously of anybody else. I don't care about anybody else. You need to as well. So I love that Jesus delegitimizes Caesar as a God. He challenges them to offer themselves to God. And he does tell them to go and pay their taxes.
yeah, absolutely. This is so important for Christians living in any time, in any nation, in any place on planet Earth. It's so important to see that basically what Jesus says here is you guys can live any of those places. You can live any of those places, use their money, pay your taxes, let the world run the way the world runs. You make, I love what Jeremiah wrote to the captives in Babylon, seek the welfare of the city where you live. But this is the thing. Remember that you're in God's image and you belong to him. You don't belong to that nation. The money might, the economy might, but you're God's. Uh, and you act as it, and you give that to God no matter what, and make that the most important priority of your life. Um, it's just such a beautiful teaching and so brief. He was just brilliant. I mean, I just love the way Jesus did things.
Yeah. No doubt. No doubt. Well, we're kind of right on time here. I don't know.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you think we need to point out or highlight before we kind of wrap it up for today?
Well, there's always more, but we're
Yeah.
try to be diligent about our time. So thank you so much, everybody. This was really good. A lot of great thoughts and discussion. I was able to pay more attention this time. I don't know why. Um, so next week, hopefully, we'll start in the second half of chapter 22.
Cool. Thanks, guys.